So without further ado, I will go ahead and dive in. So let me go into a presentation mode here. I think looking at the macro benefits, and I don't know, John Dixon, if this is something that was pitched in the early days of Orange Button, but to me, I feel like there's kind of a dual benefit to the ultimate final state of Orange Button adoption of both the accurate solar asset performance, or kind of that dashboard model that Wells Fargo or any surety would be looking at when making decisions, but also kind of that more utility level or municipality level reliable, kind of as we look at smart grid and ability to understand more of how energy and other information and financial information is flowing. There is sort of like a macro and a micro benefit to ultimately what we're trying to do. So, we always want to make sure that we're solidifying why we're doing this in the first place is really about the data insights that we get from this. But the challenge with getting those insights is dealing with this whole interoperability challenge that we certainly talked to at length. So the latest sort of analogy that in all these conversations back and forth and did some Googling, as I typically do, found this graphic that has been used in other situations to describe kind of, again, motivations and inducement strategies, and really realizing that this analogy fits pretty well. And certainly if someone has a better one, feel free to pitch it because it's still too early, but I'm going to go with this one as far as, the data itself that we want to be carrying, needs a standard to be carried on, which is that XBRL taxonomy standard that we have. The one really driving this whole initiative right now is either the owner itself or that surety. But really what we need to drive that forward is the developer, the contractor, those that are supplying a lot of that data itself. And the challenge that we keep running into is what is their incentive to adopt that. And again, we'll talk about whether or not that's a carrot or a stick to help get them to adopt that. But if that's sort of our high level analogy of what we're trying to do, the assessment that we have to date, and this is, again, definitely feel free to change or reword this, just our interpretation from interviews, is that, the challenge with the Orange Button data is that we haven't been actually collecting enough of that data, that the standard taxonomy, the 161 fields, that it is working, that there is enough fields. Of course, Dixon, there could always be more fields, but for its basic, not proof of concept, minimal viable product use case, that the standard does work. But as Michelle's brought up, there is this long-term challenge with there is really no maintenance plan for this. So continuing on that same analogy, the more we do start to ride and put more data onto this XBRL and use it, it will ultimately wear out if there isn't a long-term maintenance plan. And then ultimately, what gets this going from point A to point B is the owner itself, the owner of the asset. So of course, we'll have to come up with some graphic for our farmer that wants that hay, but of course has solar panels.
Farmer looks like you, Nathan.
You like that? It was literally like the last 30 minutes just putting some Google images together. But I think we'll, if this is making sense and jiving, kind of come up with some of that framework for the conversation around, okay, if this is the current state and we've kind of got somewhat of an answer for these, the questions that we really want to drive at and what we really want to answer, going back to this whole carrot and stick, is, what is that carrot? What is that incentive to deliver the data in that XBRL Orange Button format? And who's providing that opportunity? Really, yeah, what is that appetite for the contractor developer to go after that? This concept of the collar was a little bit abstract, but I think it works, of like who's hooking up the collar. And that's where I look at NECA or other member organizations, NASPP or others that may have some sort of an influence or way to streamline or make it easier to get hooked up to that standard, so to speak. So kind of who hooks up the collar, what control does that surety have? And again, is that a carrot or is that a stick? Who's actually putting the data into the standard, again, is a question that we still need to address. And then ultimately, who should be the one that maintains that standard and adds on to it moving forward. So, I think that this kind of constitutes like the main gap analysis questions in trying to create sort of a circular economy or a self-fulfilling cycle of incentives that will adopt and create value from the Orange Button efforts that have been done to date. So I'm going to stop. If I can pick on John P. Going back to when DOE said yes to Orange Button in the first place, like any indications as to what rang true to them, or like why they cared about it in the first place, and kind of like what their current state feelings are about it, because obviously this is the focus of it.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. So they have a target of reducing the cost per watt. It was $1 a watt when we first started this. That's been achieved. I think we should find out what the new target is, but I think it's 50 cents a watt, maybe even 25 cents a watt over the course of the next few years. And one of the most pernicious areas of cost that has consistently not come down is what they call soft cost. And so their goal in, basically funding data interoperability is to reduce the soft cost of solar by taking out the cost of all the stuff that you're talking about, manual data transcription, managing data. They want to basically be able to streamline the back end in office work and whatnot that results in construction. The only other thing I'll add is that they've seen a tremendous amount of cost reduction in like physical things, like the cost of solar modules, the cost of inverters, even the cost of physical construction, but it's still the soft cost that really hasn't come down.
Nathan, can I present one slide? It's from but I use it all the time in my types of presentations. But I think this is from the Construction Progress Coalition.
Yeah, that's a different version of the one that Patrick was bringing up. But yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. And so I think this is the carrot then, right? It's like, hey, we know the hardware costs have come down. When doing our research, we saw there's 15.8 billion. We saw a lot of similarities because 69% was manually re-entering data using duplicate softwares. And we can't exactly quantify right now, but we know that you're a big part of this 15.8 billion. And from what we've seen, and if you can align that to their goal, like that was beautiful. Whatever their goal was to get it to, like they want to fund things that are going to help them get to their goal. But that's amazing to hear that, or it's horrible that the soft costs haven't come down. And you're right, because you would think that would be like an easier one to solve than what the technology costs have come down. But something like this, I think you can drive direct parallels then to like hit them between the eyes on their goals before getting into the weeds. Because if it sounds like they want to fund us if we can help them get to their goals. And by getting to their goals, we'll get to all of our goals.
Yeah.
So that's it. I'll stop.
No, and that was, I wrote to that.
That's what I would
jump in also. One final thing on the Orange Button. One of the objectives is it's trying to change what has been a monopolistic control over the grid with 3,500 different utilities, each in their sovereign little worlds. And they've been working to they've passed legislation to create what's now known as the smart grid, which is changing the analog monopoly system to an integrated digital system. So they know that they needed, in order to achieve that, they had to have data standards. So they started with what you probably recognize, everybody has the green button, and that's your smart meter on your home that changes the analog data. I did 30 watts, here's a bill for $30, to here's how you use the 30 watts. That now enables tier pricing, and it enables a whole bunch of stuff. The Orange Button is the energy production. And they're looking to basically modernize the grid from analog to digital. And they're looking for all the stakeholders to be able to be, lack of a better word, plug and play. And that plug and play functionality allows innovation, driving down costs. But more than that, it allows for a resilient grid where you can be working in Washington and Texas and Florida and have the same data standards, which creates huge efficiencies.
Yeah, national grid interoperability. I like that because it's the two sides of it are reducing the soft costs on the more micro side, and then ultimately the data insights interoperability on the macro side. So it's a better way of framing those two main points.
Well,
So
you're right,
Nathan,
because
here's
you look at
the
these
language.
contractors that are working with different utilities, and they all have different sets of information, which makes it very hard. So a national contractor would have 50 different or 3,500 different data exchanges. And that's what the government's trying to change, to where the entire system has got one set of data. You know, going back to your chart, the carrot is, frankly, John is the money. And if he says, I'll give you a loan if you give me the data.
Yep.
And to a certain extent, I'm the credit markets. I'll give you surety bonds if you give me the data. And at the end of the day, Benny's got the software user, the contractor. And if Benny's system can get the contractor's data to me and to John, Benny has got a better product. And the software user then has a benefit. And we're really the stakeholder group right here that could literally be the ecosystem. Because I rely on SureWave to do my administrative, but not my underwriting. And I rely on John for financing. And together we want to manage the risk for our mutual clients with as least burden as possible. So John and I's objective has been to where a borrower from Wells Fargo can have one report to the bank and the surety. So having Patrick's system line up with the bank system, line up with Benny's system, would allow the data to exchange effectively. And we can demonstrate that, and we will be demonstrating that hopefully at the Digital 360 Summit, because Patrick and I are working on the ability to do it with John on just one data set, you know, the surety bond form, but also the contractor's application for payment.
Yeah, I just wanted to, if it's okay, I could chime in on a couple thoughts there. So yeah, I agree with you, Dixon. I share your vision. I think it's also important to note that another incentive is obviously, you know, just pure cost reduction associated with reduced construction costs, and then reduced financing costs if you can make the financing process more streamlined, thereby bringing in additional banks. So, because we, you know, frankly, we don't have a lot of cost associated with things like data transcription and data management and whatnot in the bank. It's more of a problem with us having the ability to scale, right? Because we have to keep hiring more and more people to process the funding applications, right? And also monthly operating reports and whatnot. But I think that what I really wanted to mention here is that, you know, as the ITC declines over the next 5 years, which it is supposed to do, then something is going to have to make up for that loss of additional revenue from the investment tax credit. And I think that, you know, finding ways to reduce the soft costs could be that source of cost reduction, and thus enabling, you know, a continuous sort of rate of low power purchase agreements, right? So I think the carrot is really, you know, to quote the DOE themselves, it's a low levelized cost of energy, but specifically in the face of declining investment tax credit. I feel like that's the ultimate carrot.
Yeah. That's, I'm glad we captured that. I'm definitely going to make sure we get that included. Because I mean, and those are things that, you know, I could ask a million more questions, but like we want to really unpack that in as part of this research. But I think at a high level, like that is a big chunk of the scope that we're going to have to research out. Because potentially, I think what we're talking about is the opportunity for new financial tools, like new strategies, as long as there is policy or whatever that allows it to happen, that can get us to that new levelized cost of energy. But, you know, X, Y, and Z need to change in order for that to happen. And that's kind of what we put very clearly in the recommendations of, you know, we're not saying you need to put this requirement. We're basically saying if you don't have this requirement somewhere, you're never going to get what you want. And being very clear and upfront with them on that sort of stuff.
Yep. And I think the most important thing is the research is going to intrigue people, but I know from my conversations, there's a lot of fatigue out there. for a lot of well-intentioned ideas. And unless they think there's something really happening, they're just going to blow it off and wait for something real. So Patrick and I have been talking. We've now written 3 electronic bonds in the energy space, and that we can actually demonstrate that that data set is now being implemented because it can be imported by stakeholders in the whole process, about 8 or 9 different stakeholders with one data set. And that's obviously what our focus at Digital 360. So I think in your review, on your research, if we tell people, hey, look at what's being implemented, can I have your thoughts? Why aren't you adopting and whatever? Because the barrier of adoption is the fear that you're going to get yourself into an 8-track player.
Yeah.
And they just want to wait until it's all been solved. And there is no waiting, because it'll never get solved if everybody's on the sidelines.
And Dixon, that example, are you doing that as USI or is that SRC?
Surety Resource Connection is a specialty company that serves only USI as a client. We only have one client.
Oh, okay.
We provide
Okay.
digital surety services to USI clients. And so I charge USI a fee out of the income they generate from the work we are able to put together. So we have almost $1 billion of construction coming up where they're going to try to put in the contractor's application for payment that was developed. Benny, you were part of that group at the AGC XML with Sage and all the rest. And then we've been working with John on the monthly operating report. We got a couple of vendors that do that and trying to get that report. And I think that will intrigue people that it's being implemented. And that should create your researchers the opportunity to have talking points that brings out the conversation that helps your survey.
Yeah, well, and again, yeah, the CFMA survey, that stuff, I want to make sure we stay focused on the scope of the DOE submission, because the scope of work that we have for this, just to kind of wrap up in our last 20 minutes here, is to continue this research of that stakeholder market conditions. I mean, everything that was just said here, we're going to articulate as high level as we can, but we need to get a lot more granular into the actual mechanics of where that waste is occurring, and basically create almost like waste prediction models of like, here's how much soft cost waste you're creating by not fixing this problem. Because I think until those we'll use the 15.8 billion, but even I kind of poke holes in that a little bit, and I think that we can come up with better numbers for the true soft cost impact of not doing this. And then
we can show them where to start. I think that's huge, right? I mean, it's like, hey, yeah, we know it's big, but we have the experts to figure out where we should even start with it.
Exactly. Yeah. And so by doing the stakeholder and kind of the market conditions and basically all the information gathering from the industry and researching the projects or the electronic bonds that you're talking about, Dixon, and coming up with basically our researchers, between John Kay and myself, our understanding of where the gaps are, where the opportunities are, and that's kind of that stage 2 development and following. And I'm going to totally botch the Delphi method, so John, interrupt me. But ultimately, the goal is to bring those different subject matter experts that we were interviewing separately and kind of bring consensus to what we have proposed as sort of that, we'll call it balanced or objective solution, and really get consensus and validation on those recommendations and requirements, other things that we come up with. And ultimately that's what goes into the formal report that, should much better justify things that we've been saying to DOE and others, and we've been saying in general. But I think until there's some real, concrete numbers behind some of this stuff, I don't think we'll get the big numbers to do what really needs to be done around, full-time XBRL maintenance and some of the other things that folks have talked about, until we've got a really good, kind of business case for it. And that's what we're pitching them, and why we're pitching it as this type 8 innovation kind of quote unquote risky initiative, because it is a little bit of a kind of newer style of market research and design thinking and other aspects that should lead to something, but it is kind of in a riskier category. And so we're not going to overcommit to direct taxonomy development and expansion and other things until we've really validated that business model, and that's the focus of this 1-year research. Would you add or change anything with that, John Kay?
No, you nailed it. Yeah, it's about coming to a consensus on where we stand, where the gap analysis or the gaps are, solutions, and for moving forward. You nailed it.
Yep.
This is Larry. I just have a thought. I mean, when we're looking at this for a research study, I would think that going back and saying, okay, XBRL was used as a common taxonomy for the financial reporting for the SEC and for financial markets. What kind of impact and savings did we see there? And what kind of adoption rate? We need, we just basically need to give DOE the ammunition to say, go do it, right?
Yeah, and I'd be curious if there are any of those. I mean, I know it's still early. It's the stuff only rolled out in like 2018, I think. But do we have any industry adoption numbers, or John P. or anyone know of any numbers that are out there?
Well, the implementation and adoption by the publicly traded companies is 100% because the government mandated it.
So as we move forward, we've been looking at, how, because we've been dealing with a lot of different stakeholders and going to have to do, a decent amount of interviews and other information gathering. So we've kind of tiered out the different participation levels that we're looking for letters of support commitment from. Obviously, John K. and myself, under the principal investigators, will be leading the initiative, but our success is really dependent upon those stakeholder participants. John, we've talked to you as well as Joel at Wells Fargo about participation. Michelle, we've been working with her about getting XBRL involved, just because they were so deeply involved in the last one. Working with Mortensen, Allison, I know she had accepted this meeting, but we'll send her the recording to get their sign off because they've got good active projects to study, as well as Rosen.
Part of the Digital 360 and to demonstrate publicly how they've used the orange button in building, well, that'll be $500 million. And then the other one is a other solar developer, that's about $1 billion worth of construction on 2 data centers. And then I've got a general contractor who is looking to use it, and Benny, I should follow up with you on this, on their subcontractors.
Yep.
So
Okay.
we will be demonstrating in time, of course it's still rough and ugly, but in time, and certainly by August, that we're actually implementing and doing something. And we hope that intrigues people to start to look and kind of get engaged, because there might be something there.